Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Anyone who saw my mail day video yesterday knows that I finally received my copy of the D&D Rules Cyclopedia. This is a book that I ordered back in early February, and despite a lot of situations or issues, getting the wrong book sent, not receiving my initial order, or not within the time frame provided, getting the wrong book after that, and there's just been a lot of stuff that's been kind of frustrating when it came to getting this book in my hands finally. Starting with the very first video, where I opened up what I thought was going to be, hoping was going to be my Rules Cyclopedia, to find that it was actually an order that I had placed nearly a month later that showed up within 3 weeks. So it started from that, but finally I have my copy. This is the one that was actually initially sent out back in February, and I didn't receive it until just yesterday. So there was obviously some sort of snafu with the mail, and I also had picked up or received another book that I ordered back in January. Actually, I ordered in December, but this was the replacement copy that was sent in January that I didn't get until yesterday. So I just want to take a moment to sort of discuss that, and then I'm going to get into sort of an overview and my thoughts on the Rules Cyclopedia, just from having it for about 24 hours. So the first thing is, I really want to take a moment to explain just how great drive-through RPG, specifically DM's Guild, has been when it's come to these issues. The customer service has always been excellent, and as I mentioned in the mail day video, I don't blame them for the difficulties receiving this book. The thing that you can kind of blame them for is sending a copy of Unearthed Arcana instead of the Rules Cyclopedia, but again, that's a snafu that happens with at the printer. And it's interesting because, as it turns out, you can't actually get Unearthed Arcana on print on demand yet, so I'm probably going to hold on to that at least for a little bit, and before I decide what I'm going to do with it. But their customer service has been excellent. Once they send something out the door, it's out of their control. The only thing that they could really do might be to get shipping information, like tracking information that someone can, be able to reference, or that they themselves might be able to reference. But when it comes to, all these issues, they've been really good about, they haven't asked for the other items sent back. And I suspect that has something to do with the fact that they know it was a screw-up on their part, or on their printer's part. And the fact of the matter is that the consumer shouldn't have to spend more of their money to send something back that they never ordered in the first place. It was just, it was sent incorrectly. And for me, I would have to probably ship it back to the United Kingdom, and that is going to be ridiculously expensive. So they haven't asked for that. Now, that being said, if you order through them, be honest. If you receive your book, don't say that you haven't. Don't try to get extra copies out of them, because their goodwill will run out if they find that this is happening a lot. So don't try to pull one over on them. Be completely and straightforward and honest, and if you get the wrong thing, tell them you got the wrong thing. Don't say you didn't receive anything. In my email, I said very specifically that I had a copy of Unearthed Arcana that was sent to me and not my Rules Cyclopedia, and all that they said is, we'll send out the new book. They didn't ask for anything else, and I was happy with that, and I sort of left it at that. If your book comes damaged, then from what I understand, they don't ask for it back. I know someone had said that they received their copy of the Rules Cyclopedia and it was really banged up, and the spine was damaged and all that because of the shipping. And now that's where they do have room for improvement, absolutely. The books could definitely be packed in a more protective manner instead of just slipping it into a cardboard sleeve. They could put it in a box, they could bubble wrap it. There are things that they could do to protect the books to make it less likely that they're going to be damaged, and it's something that they may want to consider going forward, because it will reduce the amount of things that they're replacing. But if you, excuse me, if you receive your copy of the Rules Cyclopedia and it's damaged, they will send you a replacement copy. And if you want, if your book is so badly damaged, then maybe you could actually just remove pages and put it into a folder for the individual classes or things like that. I don't know, but it's been a heck of an experience. It's been sort of a roller coaster, and one of the things that I have to say honestly is, I was really concerned that because I was ordering this print on demand online, that it was going to feel kind of empty when I ended up getting it in my collection. Like, it was one of those things that I felt like it would be, hey, you know, this is cool, I can read it now, but I almost was afraid that it would feel like I didn't earn getting the book. And through all the experiences that I've had trying to get this, I definitely felt a sense of relief and accomplishment when I finally had this in my hand. So what's today's video going to be? It's not necessarily going to be a full-blown review. I don't think I've been able to read through enough of it yet to give a definitive, review, but I've flipped through it quite a bit over the last 24 hours, and I feel confident enough to at least discuss some of the like the classes, as well as do sort of an early impressions video. So the first thing we're going to do is just have a little bit of a general flip through. I had done that yesterday, but we'll do it again today, and we'll talk about a couple of things like the classes, the combat system, and we'll go from there. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're also going to be doing a character creation video using the Rules Cyclopedia, and finally I will be doing a combat demonstration using a first level fighter doing the Goblin test, which is something that I had done for all the other previous editions, or at least the numbered editions, but we will do that for the Rules Cyclopedia as well. So first thing we're going to do is take a little flip through the book, and we'll discuss and we'll look at some of the classes, and we'll go from there. Alright, so here we have the Rules Cyclopedia, and this is a fantastic book. I'm really impressed with the quality of it. The cover is nice. There was a little bit of damage, and it was dinged up just a little bit, but honestly, this dented corner up here really isn't a big concern considering everything else. The print-on-demand version has nice thick paper stock, which is something that I do like about it, because the original had much thinner paper, and the original copy of the D&D Rules Cyclopedia was released in 1991, which was during the second edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons rule set, so that's when that was out. And quite frankly, the paper stock that they were using back then was not very good. It was pretty low quality for a lot of their things, especially in the mid-90s when they did their reprints of the core rulebooks. I mean, that paper was ridiculously thin and really prone to damage. But here we have, like I said, just very nice. I love the way that the paper feels. The quality looks great. I mean, the artwork came through, excellent. So there you go. So how is this game played? Basically, in order to generate or to create your character, and we'll go over it in more detail when I do my character creation video, but this is a 3d6 down the line system, similar to the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons first and second edition. So it's pretty much the same process. Now, one of the things in this that I kind of like about it is it's built into the actual rule itself, and I think this is where, back in the day, our DM probably got this idea from, is if you want to play a specific class and your stats just don't allow it based on what you need as your prerequisite for that class, you can take 2 points for any, from any skill, or not any skill, any attribute, and you can increase your prerequisite by 1, so to get to that minimum, which is usually 9. So it's just one of those things that you can do to sort of ensure that you can play the character that you want. So for example, you have there are some guidelines that you have to keep in mind. So it says like the prime requisite goes up for 1 point for each 2 points that another ability score goes down. If a character has 2 prime requisites, both can be raised. Constitution and charisma points cannot be exchanged with others, so you can't rob from those two. Dexterity cannot be lowered, but it may be raised for the thief or halfling character, and no score can be lowered below 9. If it's already 10 or less, it cannot be lowered. So there you go. It gives the example here. It says an elf has an intelligence strength scores of 12 and a wisdom of 13. His player wants to be both stronger and smarter. He drops the wisdom score by 2 to 11, so 1 point can be added to strength. Then he drops the wisdom again to 9 and adds 1 to intelligence. The results of the intelligence strength scores of 13 and an adjusted wisdom of 9. A cleric with strength and wisdom of 15 drops strength score by 6 to 9 and raises wisdom by 3 to 18. So you can actually do it beyond just meeting that prerequisite, so you can actually increase it all the way up to its maximum, which is 18. It says if you want to exchange any ability score points, you must do that before you go any further in making the character. No such adjustments can be made later. Remember that you do not have to adjust any ability scores. This is an option, not a requirement. You also roll hit points at first level, so you got to be careful with what you end up doing, because your hit points are not necessarily the greatest. I mean, the D8 is the highest hit dice you have, and only fighters and dwarves get that. So let's talk a little bit about the classes themselves. So the classes are the human classes, and then you have the races, which are their own separate class progressions. So you have the Cleric for humans, the Cleric, the Fighter, the Magic User, and the Thief. And then you have the Dwarf, the Elf, and the Halfling. So what's interesting is, again, I mentioned this yesterday, but for your Cleric, for example, your first level Cleric does not have any spells. They actually don't gain a spell slot until they reach 2nd level, and then they gain 1 first level spell. At 3rd level, they get 2 first level spells, and then at 4th level, they gain 1. They don't gain any extra first level spells, but they gain a 2nd level spell slot. And it sort of goes down the line. The interesting thing is, excuse me, that their maximum number of spells goes up to actually 9 at 36. Well, that's at 36 level, obviously, but they can go quite a ways as far as spells go. So if you're going to be playing a very long-term game, you're going to have plenty of spells to cast. Now, at 20th level, you've got sort of 7 first level, 6 second, 5 third, and then 4th, 5th, and 6th level spells are 4 apiece, and then you have 3 7th level spells, which is the other thing that, like AD&D and 1st and 2nd edition, clerics only have up to 7th level spells. They also have the ability to turn undead, which they gain as part of their class. So at 1st level they can turn, let's have a look here. And then when they make their turn check, if they get a 7, 9, or 11 is the number needed to successfully turn. So I don't know a whole lot about the actual turning mechanics as of yet, but at 1st level they can turn a skeleton on a 7, a zombie on a 9, and a ghoul on an 11. And they can eventually automatically turn and even destroy creatures as they progress in levels. So turn undead, I think what you do is you end up rolling, I think is it 2d6? Yeah, the player rolls 2d6 and then try to equal or exceed the target number. Clerics in this version of the game can wear any type of armor, but they are limited to non-edged weapons as far as their proficiencies go. So they don't have the ability to wield swords or anything like that, but they can use bludgeoning weapons. So weapons, no edged or pointed weapons, all others permitted. So you don't have to worry about picking like specific ones. Up next we have the Fighter. Well, I guess we should also look a little bit at their experience point progression. So the Cleric actually has a relatively quick progression, so they gain 2nd level at 1,500 experience. And then one of the important things to remember is back at this time, different classes progressed either slower or faster, depending on their perceived overall power levels. So the Cleric, especially a 1st level Cleric, is not necessarily the most effective character, so they gain 2nd level pretty quickly. And it tends to double in the amounts that they need throughout a fair amount of their progression, at least until they get up to 10th level. So from 1st to 2nd is 1,500, from 2nd to 3rd is 3,000, 6,000 for 4th, 12,000 for 5th. Now at 6th level they actually have to get 25,000, which is slightly more than double, but then it goes back to double. They need 50,000 experience points to reach 7th level, and then 100,000 for 8th. They double it again for 9th level up to 200,000, and then it's just 100,000 per level from that point forward. Alright, our Fighter is a much simpler progression. You can just see that that's all their chart is. They get, they have a moderate progression, so they're the second highest experience points for the human classes, requiring 2,000, and then 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. So that one doubles all the way up to 7th level, and then it's actually a little less than double to get to 8th level, only needing 120,000 instead of having like 128,000, which you would normally expect, and so on and so forth. They get the prerequisite is strength. They get d8s for their hit dice up until 9th level, which they only gain 2 hit points per level after that with no con modifier added. They can use any armor, any shields, they can use any weapons, and then they get things like lance attack and set spear versus charge maneuvers and fighter combat options. So again, pretty standard basic class there. After that we have our magic users, and now this, as far as the human classes are concerned, this is the slowest progression class in that's available to you, unless you want to play the other classes, the racial classes that we'll talk about in a moment. So it's 2,500 experience points to reach 2nd level, and then 5,000, 10, 20, 40, 80, and then 150. So again, up to 8th level, 7th to 8th is not quite double. And then doubled again to 300, 450, and it seems to be adding 150,000 experience points from that point forward. And they also get their spells, and the magic users can go all the way up to 9th level spells, and they do gain a spell at 1st level, otherwise it'd be pretty brutal. But it's only one spell, they don't get extra spells or anything like that. Magic users also cannot wear any armor, or shields, so they can't use any type of armor whatsoever, and they can basically, by default, they're only proficient with the dagger. However, at the DM's discretion, they can use a staff, blowgun, flaming oil, holy water, net, thrown rock, sling, and whip. So in later versions of the game, and as well as the AD&D game, I think they're automatically proficient with those. But if you're playing the Rules Cyclopedia, unless the DM allows all the other ones, you're only able to use a dagger, which is kind of interesting. And then we have our thief. So they can wear leather armor only and no shields. They can use any missile weapon and any one-handed melee weapon. Their special abilities at 1st level, they get open locks, they get their thief abilities, as well as their backstab. Now, the important thing about backstab in these versions of the game is it's not like your sneak attack from 3rd edition and on. To be able to do a backstab in this game, you have to be completely undetected all the way up until you make the attack roll. So you have to remain hidden. If you are not hidden, and then you can't get a backstab off. And backstab in this game does double the damage. So if you're rolling, say, a d6 for your weapon, you would roll 2d6 and then add your relevant modifiers after that. Alright, they also have the quickest experience point progression, as you can see there. So 1,200 to get 2nd level, 2,400 for 3rd level, and 4,800 for 4th level. And at that level gains 80% chance to read any normal non-magical writing. And at 10th level gains the ability to cast magic user spells from spell scrolls. 10% chance that the scroll will backfire. So at 10th level, rogues can start using or try to use magical scrolls that they find, which is pretty cool. They also get their thief abilities, and unlike things like AD&D where you start with base numbers and you can customize it however you want, in this game you just have your set progressions for them. So at 1st level, open locks is going to be 15%, find traps, remove traps is 10%, climb walls is 87%, so some of these numbers get kind of weird. And then hide and move silently is 20%, but hide in shadows is only 10%, so that sneak attack's probably not going to go off too well because you have to be both hidden and silent. Pickpocket is 20% and hear noise at 30%. Now what's interesting is they do eventually go above 100%. I'm assuming that is in the event that certain circumstances provide penalties. So I can't imagine, like, if, for example, once you reach 100%, there's no way that you're going to fail unless there's something that's penalizing you. So that's the only thing I can think of at this point. I will have to sit through and read through the thief abilities a little bit more thoroughly to gain a full comprehension of that, but that's what I can just think of using common sense at this point in time. And then we get into our races. So those classes were all for humans, and now we have our other playable classes, which are the Dwarf, Elf, and Halfling. It's important to note that in this version of the game, these classes do not affect your ability scores. So unlike Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, where Dwarves, for example, get +1 to Constitution and -1 to Dexterity, in this game you just use your base stats. They don't change regardless of what your class is. Now, unlike all the other classes that we've seen, which are humans so far, that can go all the way up to level 36, the Dwarves are limited to 12th level, which we'll just kind of zoom in here a little bit. So Dwarves are limited to level 12. They can use any armor and any shields. They can use any small or medium melee weapon. Short bows and crossbows are permitted, but they cannot use longbows. Their special abilities, they get fighter maneuvers, lance and set versus spear charge maneuvers at first level. At 660,000 experience points, they get fighter combat options. Half damage from spells at 1,400,000 experience points. They also get Infravision, Extra Languages, Dwarf, Gnome, Goblin, and Kobold, and a 1 in 3 chance to detect traps, sliding walls, sloping corridors, and new construction. So we'll zoom back out here. Now, as far as the progression goes, the Dwarves are slightly more experienced than the typical fighter, but less than the magic user. So they sort of have a middle experience there, sort of on the high end, but not necessarily too high, which is pretty good. Now, it has attack ranks at higher levels, and I'm going to be honest, I haven't read enough of the combat yet to understand what that means, but I will do that before I do my combat exhibition. So you also have, let's have a look here, you also have the Elf race. So Elf requires prerequisites of strength and intelligence, so they require 2, and both of them have to be 9 or greater. They get 1d6 for their hit dice up to 9th level, and then at 10th level they only gain +1 hit point and no con. They're maxed out at 10th level. They get all shields, all armor and shields permitted. They can use any weapon. They get combat maneuver or fighter maneuvers, so lance attack, set spear versus charge. At 850,000 experience points, they gain the fighter combat options for fighters, and they gain they take only half damage from dragon breath attacks at 1,600,000 experience points. They get infravision. They gain extra languages, which are elf, gnoll, hobgoblin, and orc, and a 1 in 3 chance to detect secret doors, secret hidden doors, immunity, and they're immune to ghoul paralysis, and they also gain magical spells. Now, the elf progresses ridiculously slow, but I'll talk a little bit about that sort of at the end of the video. So they gain 2nd level at 4,000 experience points. The other thing that I'm not a huge fan of, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well, is that their spells max out at 5th level. So they have a high experience point progression, and they only gain up to 5th level spells, which, other magic users, the human magic users, can go all the way to 9th level, and I just think that, it could have been done a little bit better, but I'll talk about that in a moment. But, only taking half damage at a certain threshold for Dragon Breath means that if you're fighting dragons at higher levels, then you're going to have sort of an advantage there. And then we have our last class that we're going to look at here today, and that is the Halfling. So the Halfling, their prerequisite is Dexterity, which has to be 9 or better. They get 1d6 hit dice per level, or hit points per level, up until 8th level. And I don't think they gain anything after that. Oh no, 8th level is their maximum, so yeah, they don't. They don't gain any hit points beyond 8th level. They can use any armor and shield, but the armor must be designed specifically for them. They can use any small melee weapon, short bow, and light crossbow. Their special abilities, they get fighter maneuver, set spear versus charge at 900,000 experience. Fighter combat options, combat bonuses, so -2 to AC versus monsters larger than man-sized. A +1 to attack roll with missile weapons, and a +1 to individual initiative. Half damage from spells at 300,000 experience, and half damage from Dragon Breath at 2,100,000 experience. 90% chance to hide motionless in woodlands, and a 33% chance to hide motionless in dimly lit interiors. And that's their abilities. Other than that, they they basically are similar to a fighter, which is kind of interesting. And their experience chart is very similar to the fighter. So 2,000 experience for second level, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 120. So they actually have the exact same progression as far as that goes. And that's the classes. Now you also have a couple of optional classes which I haven't really had a chance to read thoroughly yet. But from what I understand, you have the Druid here, which is a class that you can join after becoming a Cleric. So you're a Cleric up to 8th level. When you gain 9th level, you can take Druid instead. So you kind of eschew civilization, live out in the woods. So starting at 10th level, you get 1 hit point per level, and Constitution do not apply. So by the time you reach that, you are back to your normal stuff you get for clerics. I'm assuming that at 9th level they still gain their hit dice, but I'd have to look back at the cleric one for that. They require wisdom, of course, and their spells they can take druidic and clerical, which is kind of cool as well. And then you have the mystic class, which I believe is something that you would come out of as a fighter. So this is the one that I haven't really read at all, so I'm not going to talk too much about that, but it does require strength and dexterity. And you also have to have, so you have strength and dexterity as your prime requisite. Other requirements is wisdom and dexterity scores are 13 or better, so it's going to be difficult to get into that one. But I think you can start that. Can you start that from 1st level? So I'll read more about this before I actually get into it. So I'm not going to talk about it too much right now, just because I haven't really had a chance to look through it. I knew a little bit about the Druid already, but that's that. And now we have, of course, our spells, going through all those. Not a huge selection of spells for the clerics, for example, but, you know, nothing too bad. I mean, they only go up to 7th level anyway, so it's not necessarily the worst thing, but I mean, their 1st level is just a handful of spells. So they have 8 spells they can choose from at 1st level. And what's interesting is that everything pretty much for spells seems to work on the D6 standard. So for example, your Cure Wounds spell uses D6s, and your Magic Missile for your magic users also uses D6s. So it's a D6 plus 1 for Magic Missile, and for every 5 levels that you gain beyond 1st, you get 2 additional missiles, and there's no cap on that. So you can just kind of keep going with it, which is kind of cool. We also have our armor here. Now, it's also something that you need to know is that it uses more like the AD&D style armor class ratings, which start at 10 and lower down. So your best armor is your suit armor, which is kind of like heavy plate, although they have plate mail, just standard plate mail, which was probably in AD&D is usually I think referred to as field plate. But then you have your suit armor, AC 0, and your magical adjustments and shields can reduce it even further. So the combat system does use the combat charts, which I'll see if I can find here. So it uses our combat charts. So you have your different types here. So you have normal magic users or normal men, cleric, thief, and druid, and then you've got your fighters, and it just kind of shows what you need to roll in order to hit particular armor classes. So you roll your 20-sided dice, you would add your relevant stat modifier, and go from there. So that's pretty much it as far as that goes, and you also have chapters on things like building strongholds and domains. You've got your DM stuff, which is kind of cool. You actually have a picture of what looks like, I'm assuming it kind of looks like someone just describing a dungeon to his friend who's trying to either scribe it down, or it's a therapist that's concerned about him. I don't know, but it's kind of interesting because this is a piece of artwork that sort of breaks that 4th wall and actually shows the real world instead of just, you know, the fantasy artwork that we have here. Of course, we have our monster manual that we have included, and my favorite monster of all time there, the Beholder. And then beyond that, after the monsters, you have your treasure, so your magic items and, you know, things along those lines. Information on campaigning or creating campaigns, which is pretty cool. Then you got some stuff on the planes of existence. astral plane, outer planes, you know, how to breathe and move in some of them, elemental planes. And then you've got some variant rules, so there are some variant things for levels for the non-human races. And I'll have to read those because, again, I don't know, I haven't gotten a chance to look through those yet, but it is interesting. I will have to definitely take a look at that. And then you've got your campaign setting information. So you actually have like the known world, which is the Mystara setting, including maps and some colored maps, which is pretty cool, and information on some of the locations. So, I mean, you've got Elfheim, Rockholm, the 5 Shires. It's really, really cool, and it also has, so this is the World of Mystara map, it also has the Hollow World map, which is like the world inside of Mystara, with the maps again, and the information on stuff like, again, you got like the Hollow World, and just a little bit of information about that, which is really, really cool. Something that they definitely didn't have to include, but it is pretty cool that they did. And of course, you have your Appendix 2, which is how to convert to the AD&D 2nd edition game. Finally, at the back, you have things like your character sheet, spell books, information, and your appendices. So that's sort of the flip through there. And we'll just sort of go to what I consider to be sort of my initial impressions. I'm not going to say it's full review yet, but there are just some things that I just want to talk about, having had a chance to flip through the book a little bit. Alright, so we had a flip through the book. We know a little bit about the basics of, you know, character creation, and we'll go in more depth in that stuff later, talk to a little bit about some of the classes. I still need to read up on the Mystic to see exactly how that works, because it looks like you can take it at first level, whereas the Druid is something that you progress into later on. So I'll have to have a look at that, and if anyone knows how that works, you can always let me know in the comments as well, but, you know, over the next day or so, I'm hoping to sort of read through and understand that. Overall, this again isn't necessarily what I consider to be a definitive review or anything like that, but I can say, just from having this for a single day, this is one of the coolest D&D books I've ever owned. It's just, there's just so much in this book that's packed into it. It's really kind of incredible. And so what this was, it was released in 1991, and it was a compilation of the first 4 of the BECME box sets. So it had your basic, expert, companion, and master rules all combined into one. It does mention the immortal rules a little bit, but it doesn't go into a lot of detail there. They did release Wrath of the Immortals, which was a product designed to sort of simplify and fix the immortals, to make them a little bit better for play, I guess. But essentially the immortals is kind of like epic level for things like 3rd edition, and it just kind of makes my head hurt, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. Now, what's really awesome about this book is, in addition to all that stuff in there, it also has, you know, just some information about the world itself. So for people who love the Pathfinder role-playing game and praise their core rulebook for having the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide all in one, this has even more than that. It has your Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master Guide, Monster Manual, and a campaign setting. It's not the most in-depth campaign setting, but it includes maps and brief descriptions of some of the major locations. So it gives you more than enough to go on to have some sort of basis to start your adventures in. So this is an absolutely amazing book. Now, it doesn't quite work like, you know, your D20 system now. So even though you see things like you have your ability scores and they just have, you know, set modifiers, unlike AD&D, which breaks all of your stats down into separate charts, it's not going to translate quite the same way. You still have to understand the combat matrix system, meaning that, you know, you have to consult what the armor class is, what your level is, and to get the number that you need to hit, you then roll your d20 and you add like your strength modifier, for example, and try to equal or exceed that number. The character sheets do have a spot to put down that combat matrix for your character, so that's something that, again, is really important to do, and I highly recommend that you do that. And otherwise, you know, or if you do that, it's going to make combat a lot easier. Just, you know, have the DM, and in fact with that, the DM doesn't even have to give you the armor class. You can just say, you know, I hit up to this AC, although it works best if the DM still gives you the armor class, so you know, you can just say if you hit or miss based off what you roll in the dice. So this is, again, really, really cool. Is it perfect? Well, there's a couple of things that I'm not 100% sure of. The main thing is the Halfling class. The Halfling just doesn't really feel like it's worth it. I mean, having a like 90% chance to hide out in the wilderness is fine, but you have to be completely still, so you can't actually sneak. You just have to basically, you can move, and then you need to have some sort of cover, and then you can, just stand still and hide. And that's alright, but it just feels like they could have done a little bit more. Like, I was honestly expecting the halfling to have thief-like abilities, and have certain things be maybe better than the thief, and have certain things perhaps be worse than the thief, and just not have the backstab ability. That's what I was kind of expecting, and instead the halfling is a fighter that can hide if they don't move. Now they do get the abilities to get half damage against spells and dragon breath weapons, or breath weapons I think in general, which is fine, but you have to progress quite far to get there, and the level cap of 8 is not the greatest. As far as elves go, again, the spell restriction to only 5th level spells, in my opinion, is a little bit too low. Especially, I'm hoping that the variant rules, which have like level progressions all the way up to level 36, even if you don't gain hit dice, stuff like that, I would like to see the elves be able to cast a few higher level spells. Especially since in a lot of D&D history, or a lot of D&D settings, humans learned magic from the elves. Now, does it make sense that the humans would progress faster through their spell progression? Yeah, that does make sense, because humans are shorter lived, they're more ambitious, and they have more of a drive to sort of self-improve like that. So it makes sense that they would gain them sooner. But the fact that elves can't go beyond having like 2 5th level spells just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I think there should be experience progression thresholds where when they reach it, they can gain a 6th level spell slot, a 7th level, an 8th level, and a 9th level. Even if they never gain more than 1 spell for each of those levels, I think they should still have access to them, especially when they reach these, milestones as far as their experience goes. Speaking of their experience, I know it often kind of gets pointed out or used against elves in this version of the game that their experience progression is horrible, needing 4,000 experience to gain 2nd level. And yeah, that on paper does look really crappy. But there are some things that I think are kind of important to know when you look at that. So the elf class is the only multi-class character in this book. And that multi-class character is a fighter magic user. So they get the abilities of a fighter and the ability to cast spells. Now, for example, if you made that character an AD&D, the way that it would work is you'd be multi-class fighter magic user. And when you're multi-class, you divide your experience points amongst the number of classes that you have. So if I made an AD&D fighter magic user and I gained 100 experience points, only 50 of those experience points would go towards the fighter, and only 50 of those, the other 50 would go towards the magic user. So in order to gain 2nd level as a fighter, you would need, in this one, it would be 2,000 experience points, and to gain 2nd level in a magic user, you would actually need 2,500. And since you're splitting, it makes it harder. So with this one, with the elf, it's basically like you're splitting the experience points between those two classes, but instead of having the levels gained separately, like at 2,000 for a fighter and 2,500 for a magic user, you just gain 2nd level all at the same time, and it's less experience to get that 2nd level of magic user. So it's sort of like a weird effective thing that it makes sense when you look at it compared to AD&D multi-class experience splitting. So that way it does make sense. It's weird that they do it that way, and it does look really jarring on the paper, but based on everything that I know about AD&D, I would say that that's what they're doing. The other cool thing about the elf is that they can wear their armor while casting spells, unlike other magic users. So they have an ability that even a multi-class fighter magic user would not be able to do. So they're kind of cool from that point. So yeah, I mean, that's my early impressions of the D&D Rules Cyclopedia. I still need to go through character creation, and I want to go through the combat system. The combat system, I will say briefly, is split into different phases. So there's like a movement phase, there's I think a range attack phase, a magics phase, and then your hand-to-hand combat. So they kind of all go off at those points in time, and I'll talk more about that when I do the combat demonstration. But at the end of the day, this is an absolutely amazing, amazing book, and if you're interested in the early history of D&D and you want to go back and play some old school D&D, this is the one that I recommend. You know, you can go back and want to play like first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, but you're going to have to buy 3 separate books in order to do that, whereas with this, you can buy just the one book, and then you have all the information that you need. And this is a nice playing version of the game. I played it a little bit a few years ago, and I really loved it, and I just, you know, I think that this is the way to go. So if you have an interest in retro RPGs and you want to experience some of Dungeons & Dragons' earlier history, then this is probably the best way to go about it. Pick this book up, it's got everything that you need, and I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I love it, I'm so glad to finally have it, and I can't wait to finish recording so I can go back and start reading a little bit more. So anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Funding for this channel is provided by my awesome supporters over on Patreon. So everyone who has donated to that, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. Even $1 a month helps immensely, and without your guys' support, this channel would not be possible. I want to provide special thanks to Kennedy S., David L., Will W., Michael L., The Twisted Tentacle Inn, and Roll Stats for their generous donations. Thank you again to everyone who's contributed, and all of you make this possible.